Thank you. Thank you.
Peter, it's an immense pleasure to see you here and to introduce you as our next speaker. Peter, as we all know, is the director of the Music and the Brain Center at Aarhus University, and an exquisite bass musician, and I had the pleasure to hear him play several times. And today he's going to share his conceptualization of rhythmic complexity and predictive coding in the brain with a particular focus on groove. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I just need to share my screen.
Yes.
Just one moment. Yes, sorry. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
No, it's because it's for some reason I am. Yeah, I'll try to do this. Yeah.
And here we go. Excellent.
Here we go, but now I can't see it. This is. I'll just see what I can do here to make this work. Sorry for.
So now, yes, yep, but.
Just one moment. Yeah, I simply can't see my screen for some reason.
We also only see your web browser. We don't see
yes.
your
that was strange.
Maybe you stop sharing and then you try it again.
I'll do something else. Now I know, I think I know what to do. I'll just have to. I'll try to do it again.
At least we get a view on your beautiful bass in the background.
Yeah, that's nice. It's slightly, yeah, now I think this will work. Okay?
Yes, excellent.
So now you see some, it's just, yeah, from the beginning. I'm very sorry, but since we're working from home because of COVID, I have the cleaning lady in the back. So, so I hope it's not disturbing too much, the noise.
All right.
Anyway,
here you go.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to thank you, Sonia, and the other organizers for arranging this fantastic meeting. It's a real pleasure, and it's an impressive line of speakers that you have. So I'm very honored to be here. I'll be speaking mostly about our studies on groove today, and also because we have some new exciting stuff that I would like to share with you in the end, but in the beginning you will see stuff that some of you might have seen before. But just to get on with it, I can just say that, of course, the Center for Music in the Brain, which I'm directing, is at the moment around 35 researchers who are working on understanding what music does to the brain and what we can learn about the brain from this. And of course, many of the things that, or one of the things that we have been especially interested in over the years is rhythm and especially groove. And of course, why study groove? Well, first of all, it's something that almost every human being is capable of experiencing. And we find great pleasure in it, though it seems to be relatively unique to us if you compare it to animals, which I'm sure that Annie Patel will take up later today. But importantly also, it has rehabilitation possibilities. For instance, if you have Parkinson's disease, it's of course something that we can use groove to make the motor system, maybe these patients work better. We'll get back to that in the end of this story. But the Center of Music in the Brain is built on the idea of predictive coding, which is of course something where we try to think about the music from a prediction perspective, both in music and in the brain. So the idea is that what the brain has to do is to find the hidden causes of the input, of maybe an input with a lot of noise in it. And my normal example is this. I'll just give it to you again. It's that we can, for instance, have the rhythm 3 against 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And the thing is that even though it's the same acoustic input to our brains, there's a big difference from listening to something from the perspective of a march, or if you listen to it as a waltz, for instance. And that means, and since, of course, what we are thinking about when we say meter is a sort of a predictive model. So if you are listening to a piece of music and then the brain decides, okay, this must be a 4/4 meter, then it also applies some structure to this that helps you predict the future events. So strong, weak, not so strong, weak, and so forth. And of course, this is a hierarchical thing where you have both subdivisions and at the higher level also maybe the form. And the idea behind predictive coding is something that we have proposed in a series of papers. Of course, the predictive coding theory, or the predictive processing theory, as Carl calls it now, is proposed by Carl Friston and colleagues, but also by many other researchers. But it's basically the fundamental principles by which the brain perceives and learn about the brain. And this, I think, may serve as a very useful framework for understanding how musical groove affects the brain. So the general idea about this theory is that the basic problem, of course, as I said before, is for the brain to determine the causes of its sensory input, which could be the meter, for instance, and by doing so, by comparing its internal model or its prediction of the near future to the incoming stimulus, or more plainly, to calculate the probability that the predictive model is correct, that it is a 4/4 meter, giving the sensory input. So if there is a discrepancy between what is coming in, and there always is, and the model, it leads to prediction error that the brain tries to minimize at different hierarchical levels of the brain networks. And this process is the basis for perceiving the world and learning about the world. So, and a very important thing, as you can see here down in this corner, is that the prediction error that the brain tries to explain away is weighted by the precision. So, and the precision, for instance, of the model that we apply to this. So, when we listen to a piece of music, and it could be just a simple rhythm like da 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 da, and here you have you can see that you have a syncopation in this rhythm. And what this syncopation does is that the model that the brain has, the metrical model, will be isochronous, of course. So when we experience this syncopation, then we try to fill in the missing beat, the missing third beat here, for instance. And we might do that by tapping our feet. And so we, of course, perceive it in a slightly different way. And in a sense, what we're doing is that we are sampling, by tapping the feet, we are sampling the stimulus in a different way, because suddenly we have our body in the sampling. And that means that perception and action is tied by these two things. This might lead to emotion and to learning over time. But of course, what I was talking about before was that there's a very important concept of precision. And Massimo Lumacca from the Music in the Brain Center, he made this wonderful study where he took different environment, a completely isochronous environment, duck, 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 and different rhythms, a low entropy rhythm and a high entropy rhythm. So it would, the stimulus per se would be, or the context would be more and more complex. And then he placed deviations, rhythmic deviations, once every fifth time, and a small deviation and a large deviation. And what you can see when you do EEG on this stimulus or this in this setting, then you can see that there's a mismatch negativity, and for the small deviation, it's almost not noticeable if you have a high entropy, a complex context, but as the simpler the context becomes, the more precise our predictions become, and therefore we get a larger mismatch negativity, which is a marker of the prediction error. If you have a large deviation, the brain will figure it out anyway. This is a complex story. The whole idea about precision is a complex story. Just to finish by this small introduction to the predictive coding of music theory, basically what art does is that it creates a prediction error that the brain cannot get rid of. So, for instance, this was a painting that I saw at our local art museum, and I took a photograph of it. And I don't know the painter, but as you can see, what we are looking at here are the two bumps, the two annoying bumps on this straight line here. And of course, that's because it creates prediction error to our prediction that when your gaze goes in this direction upwards, towards the right corner, then it should be a straight line. But and this is not. No matter how many times you look at this, you'll still be annoyed by this. Of course, there are better painters, I guess, than this guy. This is also a picture that I took when I visited the Mariani Foundation, and in Milan, just before COVID started, luckily. And if you look at Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper here, you can see there's a very nice line over the heads here. But what happens here? Then we have this annoying finger from Peter, who is asking a question. And this is basically the story. I'm not going to go much into this, but this just to say that groove is basically like this. So if you, for instance, take a piece of music that really wants you to move your feet, and here I usually play a James Brown song, but I've just been watching the 10 hours of Beatles recordings, which I can really recommend for everybody who's interested in finding out how rock music is being created. And so I thought I would just play this small excerpt from Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band for you. Listen to this. Okay, I could be listening to this for a long time, but just to say to you that, of course, the rhythm is very much the meter which is established, even though we have this very strong emphasis on the second and the fourth beat, the weak beats, but they are not weak when you listen to this. So this also creates this kind of wanting to move. But here we have three syncopations here with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. So. This is something that is common to all kinds of music, which is which has the aim of you moving your feet. And many of you will be familiar with our first studies, Maria Witek's study, for instance, here, where she played different rhythms, just drum beat rhythms, with an increasing amount of syncopation. Like it would be something like this. Dum, 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 dum. So what you can see here is as you increase the complexity by increasing the syncopation in these rhythms, you also sort of lose the beat and and in the beginning you think it's very nice, and suddenly you tend to lose the beat. So there is sort of a sweet spot for wanting to move, and to the pleasure you feel. So if you should interpret this in a predictive coding way, you would say that in principle the precision or the prediction that you, or the prediction error that you feel is weighed by the precision. So the more syncopations you have in your stimuli, the less your precision could be. So it'll be more unprecise, your sensorimeter, as you can see here on the right screen. And if you time these together, you actually get the inverted U shape. And we do have some evidence for this to be true, because if you play these rhythms to people and use motion capture, which we did, we could see that you have a decreasing linear relationship between amount of syncopation and how precise your beat is. Anyway, I did another study with Georgios Karageorgis, which sort of confirmed also that if you want to learn how to dance, even if you are a trained dancer, you want as little of syncopation in the rhythms as possible. Anyway, first thing we did was to do an fMRI study of this, and here you can see that if you, from these rhythms that Maria and I produced here, you get, for the inverted U shape, you get areas that are very much, that makes a lot of sense. You get the auditory cortices, of course, because you listen to something, and you get the areas in the basal ganglia, the pallidum and the putamen, and the anterior inferior insula when you put people to a brain scanner. But we were not completely satisfied with this study, because one of the things was that we hadn't control for the number of beats in the rhythm, and the more density of beats you have in rhythms, the more it will actually be more groovy. So Thomas Matthews did this follow-up study where he made a lot of different clave rhythms which had exactly the same amount of beats. Do, 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 goo, goo, do, do, goo, goo, goo. And then we added another dimension. We added harmony to each of these at 3 different levels of complexity. So now we suddenly had a very nice 3x3 study, and where we had, for instance, low complexity of harmony and rhythm would sound something like this. Maybe not so exciting. Then you could have a high complexity of both harmony and rhythm. You might learn to like this, but it'll take you a long time. And then you have the medium complexity, which was, of course, what we thought would be our winner. So you can just listen to this very briefly here. So, again, to make this more short story, then when you look at the behavior of this, you get this very pronounced and nice U-shaped curve. And here you don't have the confound of the number of beats. But when you then take the medium complexity and contrast them in an fMRI study to the high complexity, and we did this to make this simpler and more powerful, we left out the low complexity. Then you get these the same areas, the putamen, also the caudate and the basal ganglia, and you get premotor areas, SMA and PMC. And very importantly, also you get the left medial or orbitofrontal cortex, which is part of the reward network. So what you can say is that you both have the pleasure and the wanting to move very clearly in this study. And what Thomas also did to the behavioral was that he did a mediation analysis to see what effect does the harmony and the rhythmic complexity have on our pleasure and wanting to move ratings, so the groove. So the thing is that rhythmic complexity works directly on wanting to move and directly on pleasure ratings. Harmonic complexity works on the pleasure. So you feel more pleasure, and it works indirectly through the pleasure on our wanting to move ratings. So in principle, you could have music that you, with syncopation, if you did it in the right way, that people would move to, but by adding harmony and other stuff, texture to it, you get a more rich experience and a more pleasurable experience of it. And if you take the harmonies alone, which didn't give us any U-shaped curve in the original study, and you also, and what we did was that we made a separate study here where we also had an octave, so we had an even lower level of harmonic complexity. Then you see this very nice U-shaped curve, and there's a difference between the musicians, so that the musicians prefer more complex harmonies than non-musicians, which is a very nice study in itself. It sort of disappears, this U-shaped curve, under the influence of rhythm, because these rhythms are so strong. Anyway, Jan Stupacker did a follow-up study on this and showed that we don't have to use the whole 54 stimulus set that we had in the beginning. You actually only have to use 9 stimulus, 1 for each category in the 3x3 design, which I think is a very, very nice result. So that makes these studies much simpler. But now to the Parkinson, where we have some exciting new findings. So Victor Pando made a study on Parkinson patients where he used the clave rhythms and both the harmonic and the rhythmic complexity, and he had 3 different types of participants. He had young participants, and he had old participants that were healthy but at the same age of Parkinson patients that he had both on medication, which is what is written here as PD2, and off medication of their dopamine agonists. And what you can see here is that you have this very nice, in the young, we just replicated this very nice U-shaped curve, exactly what we got in Thomas' studies. In the older subjects, we had a more, still the U-shaped curve, it's not as pronounced, and as for the pleasure, they tend to also like the low complexity of rhythms. So I don't know whether that means that as you get older you don't like to move as much. Anyway, for the Parkinson patients with their medication, you had a very flat U-shaped curve here. So it's almost the same for the medium and the low and the medium complexity rhythms. But if you take them off the medication, they only like the complete simple rhythms. So we wanted to take that into the scanner, and we took, because we have this sort of this relationship where it's linear, we took, as for the harmony, we took an even lower level of rhythmic complexity, the isochronous. I'll just play it for you here. So yeah, you would probably stop moving to that in a very short while. Anyway, our hypotheses were, of course, that for the healthier adults, we would have a peak at the medium, but for the Parkinson patients, a peak at the low complexity rhythms, or low syncopated rhythm. And that was exactly what we found. Here you can see the healthy controls and the Parkinson patients on the right. And what you can see here is that you have the peak, the healthy controls prefer to move to the medium complexity rhythms. They want to move and they like it more. And for the PD patients, you have they do want to move, but they like the low complexity rhythms with no syncopations. So where they only have like a sense of the 4 beats, the meter 1, 2, 3, 4, this kind of rhythms. And if you then take them to an fMRI study, and we have loads of data, but I'm only going to talk about one small thing here because of time. I think my time is almost running out. But what we have here, we made a Roy to Roy analysis of connectivity. We used the Con toolbox, and you have the healthy controls on the left. And we used the regions of interest that we used was auditory, sensorimotor, and reward system areas. It's done by a combination of the AAL parcellation using the AAL library and another library from Oxford University. So what you see here is that when you have the isochronous, it's the isochronous, the low and the medium and the high syncopated rhythms. And what you see is that for isochronous rhythms, you only have connectivity between the auditory cortices. But once, if you look at the healthy controls, you have the low and the medium complexity, you see a connectivity to the SMA also. And for the high end, that disappears again. And the strongest connectivity, as you can see by the red color here on the bottom, sorry for not having a color code, but on the bottom here, you can see that there's strongest connectivity in the medium syncopated rhythms. For the Parkinson patients, you have more connectivity in the low, and you have that for both the right and the left auditory cortices. You have connectivity towards the SMA. Again, for the medium, you have a little less connectivity that survived the error correction. And interestingly, for the high complexity, you have anticorrelated areas from the auditory cortices to the anterior cingulate, maybe some kind of error correction that goes wrong, and to the SMA. So I think this is extremely exciting data that can give us a glimpse into movement to groove in healthy and Parkinson patients. I also had another study that I wanted, a very exciting one, but I will save that for the next time. And I'll just give you the conclusions of this talk. I think the predictive coding model provides a very elegant framework for interpreting these brain processing music, and it forms our understanding of the relationship between rhythm and meter, groove related motor behavior, and there's a U-shaped relation between the degree of syncopation and wanting to move and pleasure, but a negative linear relationship with the ability to synchronize with the beat, which might give us this U-shaped curve. The clave stimulus combining harmony and rhythm produces a strong sensation of groove in relation to medium syncopated rhythms compared to high and low complexity, and it involves motor and reward related activity. And it's really efficient, the stimulus, and we have now boiled it down to 9 stimulus. You're very welcome to borrow this from us if you want to. Musicians have a groove-related premotor activity, more groove-related premotor activities than non-musicians, and Parkinson patients have a skewed inverted U-shape. That means that they prefer simpler rhythms. And the functional connectivity for Parkinson patients include, and healthy controls include SMA for low and medium syncopated rhythms, but only auditory cortex for isochronous rhythms and highly syncopated rhythms. Increasing the complexity, and this is what I would have talked about, that the complexity of rhythm tasks such as perception and production of polyrhythms, that basically means that you will have more of the inferior frontal gyrus, or you will see more activity in the inferior frontal gyrus, and also in the SMA and the PMC. That'll be a later talk. But anyway, thanks to all of the people who have helped me doing this, and thanks for listening.
Thanks, Peter, for this very, very great introduction to your conceptualization and some of the very interesting data that you shared with us. Let me just have a quick look while people are coming on, potentially with questions, even though we're running a bit out of time.
I know.
Let me just quickly ask you, I love the idea of a sweet spot that may trigger movement in us. Do you think it's specific to musicians? Is it something that can vary in individuals, or is it something that we all have? And most critically, is the Parkinson patient way out of line with his sweet spot?
I mean, this is a wonderful question. I think that we have done this both in musicians and non-musicians. Actually, the first of the studies were mostly in non-musicians, and they were all young people we had in Maria's original study, and they were conformly, they chose the same rhythms very conformly. So I think it's if you have the same age group, of course, these were people that were used to going to clubs and so forth. They are completely used to this kind of music, and we used mostly these rhythms. So if you have sort of the same age group, I think we are very much the same. But and we didn't see any difference in musicians and non-musicians. I think though that was also because this was an internet study and we couldn't test the musicians properly. So I'm sure that you will have a slightly skewed tendency for musicians to prefer more complex rhythms. But still we all have this thing that we don't want to move to isochronous rhythm, boom, boom, boom. Nobody wants to move to that. And I think even if you have a drum kit, you still have kind of this prediction error that there's such an emphasis on the second and the fourth beat. So so I think it's very individual. But it is, of course, very individual, but it is like in a spectrum where people have different peaks, different places. And basically, even our Parkinson patients, they really, I mean, if you look at the, if you look at the average, then they enjoyed these rhythms as much as the healthy controls did. So I think that's very, very reassuring in a way that this is a good way to go. But as I said, they are kind of a little bit apart in the peaks.
More to come, I'm sure. Peter, I'm very, very sorry to stop right now because my book is already available. People are clapping away. They're incredibly impressed by your beatboxing capacity and that you intuitively do to re-emphasize rhythms. That's beautiful to watch. And there's certainly a number of questions for you, and I would appreciate if you have a check and maybe answer them. Thanks so much, Peter. Bye-bye.
Bye.